My name is Eleanor Bennett. I am 71 years old. After my husband died, my son hugged me at the funeral home, right there among the flowers and the hushed voices of relatives I hadn't seen in years. And he said the words I needed to hear more than anything else in the world at that moment. "Mom, I'll take care of everything." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I have? Michael was my only child, the boy I had raised alone through long summers while his father worked construction jobs 2 states away just to keep us afloat. The boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose homework I had checked at our kitchen table for 18 years of my career as a schoolteacher. I had spent 43 years married to a good, steady man named Walter, and in the disorienting fog of grief that followed his death, hearing my son promise to shoulder the burden felt like the only solid ground left standing. 2 months later, he drove me to a nursing home and told me it was for my own good. I want to try to explain how that happened, because from the outside, I understand it must sound impossible. How does a competent, independent 71-year-old woman end up moved into assisted living against her own wishes in the space of 2 months? The truth is that grief makes people vulnerable in ways that are difficult to see from the outside, and even more difficult to see clearly from the inside, while you're living through it. In the weeks after Walter's funeral, I was not myself. I understand that now with a clarity I didn't have then. I forgot appointments. I left the stove on twice, which frightened me badly both times. I cried in the grocery store over a brand of coffee Walter used to buy. Michael visited often during that period, more often than he had in years honestly, and each time he came he gently pointed out these small lapses, framing them with such tenderness that I never once suspected he was building a case. "Mom, you left the stove on again," he'd say, his voice soft with concern. "I just worry about you being alone in that big house." The house he meant was the one Walter and I had built almost from nothing, nearly 20 years earlier, back when Walter still had knees good enough to climb a ladder, and I still had a salary coming in from the elementary school. We had picked out every fixture together. Walter had built the back porch with his own hands over 2 summers, insisting on doing it right even though a contractor could have finished it in a week. I had planted the rose bushes along the side fence myself, and I still, even now, remember which color bloomed on which side. That house held 43 years of our marriage inside its walls, every anniversary, every holiday, the room where Michael had grown up, the kitchen where I had taught myself to bake his birthday cakes from scratch every year of his childhood. About 6 weeks after the funeral, Michael brought a folder of papers to the kitchen table, the same table where I had once checked his homework, and told me they were forms related to Walter's estate. Insurance paperwork, he said, and some documents so he could help me manage the bills while I was still finding my footing. I remember signing where he pointed, barely reading the pages in front of me, trusting my son completely, still moving through those weeks in a kind of fog where ordinary tasks felt like wading through water. He was patient with me. He made me tea while I signed. He told me not to worry about any of it, that he would handle everything from here. I did not understand, signing those papers at my own kitchen table with my son's reassuring hand on my shoulder, that I had just given him power of attorney over my property. 2 months after the funeral, he told me gently that he'd found a wonderful place for me, a nursing facility. He called it a senior living community, with a beautiful dining room and organized activities and other residents my age. He said it was temporary, just until I was feeling more like myself. He said it was for my own good. I remember standing in the doorway of the home Walter and I had built, looking back at the rose bushes along the side fence, and feeling too tired, too grief-worn, too uncertain of my own judgment after weeks of being gently told I couldn't quite trust it, to argue with him. I moved into the facility that same week. Michael promised he would visit every Sunday. For the first month, he kept that promise, more or less, arriving with flowers or a magazine, sitting with me in the common room for perhaps 45 minutes before finding a reason he needed to leave. By the second month, the Sunday visits had become every other Sunday. By the third month, they had thinned to something closer to once a month. Then less than that, replaced increasingly by short, cheerful phone calls that rarely lasted more than a few minutes. I told myself he was busy. He had always worked hard. Michael had built a genuinely successful career as a real estate agent, one of the top performers at his firm, and I told myself, the way mothers often tell themselves things they need to believe, that the demands of his work simply left him less time than he wished he had. Then, one afternoon nearly 5 months into my stay at the facility, I received a phone call from Diane, a woman who had lived 2 doors down from Walter and me for almost 15 years, a genuinely kind neighbor I had missed dearly since the move. She called to check on me, the way she occasionally did, and somewhere in the conversation, almost in passing, she mentioned that a for sale sign had gone up in front of my house. I sat very still in the common room chair, holding the phone, certain I had misheard her. I had never agreed to sell that house. I had never even discussed the possibility with Michael. Not once, in any conversation I could remember. That house belonged to me, to Walter's memory, to 20 years of a life we had built together with our own hands. I told Diane there must be some mistake, that perhaps she was thinking of a different property. But she was certain. She had seen the sign herself, driving past just that morning. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the unfamiliar bed in that unfamiliar facility room, staring at the ceiling, running back through every conversation I could remember having with my son over the past 5 months, searching for some explanation that made sense of what Diane had told me. I found none. The following week, I asked one of the aides at the facility to help me contact a lawyer. Not Michael's lawyer, whom I'd met briefly at some point during those foggy early weeks, but an independent attorney, a woman named Carol Whitfield, whose name I remembered from a legal aid pamphlet in the facility's common area, meant for exactly this kind of situation, for residents who suspected something had gone wrong with their affairs. Carol came to visit me within days, and she was patient and thorough in a way I found immensely comforting after months of feeling like my own judgment couldn't be trusted. She requested copies of the paperwork I had signed at that kitchen table 5 months earlier, and within a week she had an answer for me, delivered gently but plainly, the way a good doctor delivers a difficult diagnosis. The papers I had signed, believing them to be simple bill-paying assistance, had in fact granted Michael a broad power of attorney over my property. Using that authority, he had listed the house for sale roughly 3 months into my stay at the facility, and Carol told me this part very carefully, watching my face as she said it. The sale had already gone through. The house Walter and I had built was no longer mine. I felt something in me go hollow, hearing that. Not just grief for the house itself, though that grief was real and enormous. It was the deeper wound underneath it, the understanding that my own son had used my weakest, most vulnerable weeks, the weeks right after I buried his father, to take from me the one thing that held the physical memory of our entire marriage inside it. But Carol wasn't finished. She explained that many years earlier, she had found the relevant documentation buried in Walter's old estate files, something Walter himself had insisted upon setting up decades before, back when we first built the house, with a level of foresight I hadn't fully appreciated at the time and had honestly half forgotten existed. Walter had structured the property's ownership with a specific clause, requiring that any future sale of the house direct the entire proceeds automatically to the legal owner of record. Meaning me, specifically, regardless of who held power of attorney or handled the transaction itself. Walter, ever cautious, ever protective in his quiet way, had built a safeguard into our home's ownership that neither Michael nor, honestly, I myself had remembered was there. The house had been sold. That much was true and could not be undone. But every cent from that sale, the full proceeds, sitting untouched and waiting, had gone directly into my own personal account. Michael had access to nothing. I remember exactly how I learned that Michael had discovered this. He came to the facility unannounced, something he hadn't done in months, his face carrying an expression I had genuinely never seen on him before. Not quite panic, but close to it. He had clearly gone to access the funds from the sale, expecting, I suppose, that his power of attorney extended that far, and had instead been informed by the bank, or perhaps by his own lawyer scrambling to explain the situation, that he could not touch a single dollar of it. He sat across from me in the same common room where I had once waited every other Sunday for his increasingly rare visits, and for the first time in months, he didn't try to sound reassuring. He tried, instead, to explain himself. His business had taken some difficult turns, he admitted, finally, months of financial pressure I had known nothing about, pressure that had apparently made the equity sitting in his mother's paid-off house look, to him, like a solution rather than a betrayal. I listened to all of it. I did not raise my voice. I found, sitting there, that I simply didn't have it in me anymore to be as angry as the situation perhaps warranted. I told him I needed time and space, and that I would be making my own decisions from that point forward about where I lived and how I spent what remained of my life. He left that day looking smaller than I had ever seen him look. I moved out of the facility within the month. Carol helped me revoke the power of attorney entirely and set up proper independent management of my finances, with safeguards this time that I understood fully before signing a single page. It took the better part of a year to find the right place, but I eventually did. A small, sun-filled house near a lake about 40 minutes from where Walter and I had lived, with a wide porch that reminded me, in the gentlest way, of the one Walter had built with his own hands all those years ago. I invited 2 dear friends to join me there, both of them widows I had known for decades, both of them navigating their own versions of the particular loneliness that comes with outliving a husband. We found a small property nearby that let the 3 of us each have our own space while sharing a garden between our houses, and it was Rosalind's idea, actually, to start a little book club with some of the other women in the area, meeting on Thursday evenings with tea and far too many opinions about whichever novel we'd chosen that month. A local journalist wrote a small feature about our unusual little arrangement about a year after I moved in. 3 widows, a shared garden, a lakeside book club that had somehow become the liveliest social event in our small community. She asked me, near the end of the interview, whether I had any regrets about everything that had happened with the house, with my son, with the difficult months at the facility. I remember smiling at her, and meaning it fully when I answered. My son took my house, I told her. But he accidentally gave me my life back. I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it to minimize what Michael did. What he did was a real betrayal, and I have not fully made my peace with it. Not in the neat, tidy way people sometimes want a story like this to resolve. I speak to him now, occasionally, brief conversations that carry a formality between us that didn't used to exist. I don't know if that will ever fully soften. Some breaches, once they happen, leave a mark that stays regardless of how much time passes. But I have also come to understand something in the year since I left that facility, something I don't think I would have learned any other way. I had spent so many decades being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's teacher, defining myself almost entirely by what I gave to other people, that I had genuinely forgotten I was also allowed to be simply myself. A woman with her own preferences, her own garden, her own Thursday evenings spent arguing happily with friends about a novel's ending. Growing old doesn't mean giving up your future. Sometimes, in the strangest and most painful way imaginable, it turns out to be the beginning of the happiest chapter of your life. Do you think Eleanor should ever forgive her son?